No, he came and he went.
Maybe it's something I said.
Well, it is 5-2 now. We'll start getting people coming in over the next few minutes. And I'm just going to set up the presentation. And we've got another person arriving, Dan Collins, another Dan. Right, so we've got 15, 16 people on the call. Dan, can everyone just mute themselves, please? We're going to start with Tracy. And I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. So just to give you some quick background, we've done 2 of these events already before. And today's takes on a different subject matter. So obviously the surrounding to this was business continuity and growth during and beyond COVID-19. Tracy Keeling wrote a white paper for us a few weeks ago now. Well, it's actually a few months ago now. And obviously that was brilliant at the time. It gave some really pertinent advice for businesses that were looking to handle this current crisis. But some of that is not quite so relevant. It's a little bit out of date. The idea of these events was to bring people up to speed with what they really need to be looking at right now in their businesses. And through that, we unearthed a lot of talk about certain technologies, methodologies, processes. Tracy's going to talk a little bit about that. And then we've got Tim Olsen, who's going to be talking about RPA and automation and how to enable that into your business. So I'll hand over to Tracy, our chairperson. Tracy, over to you.
Hi, Sam. Thank you for that. So the last calls that we've done, we've gone through a little bit of setting the scene and looking at different things. And if there's any of you that's been on the call before, I'm just going to do a few minutes of where we've been previously and some of the things that we've discussed. Because obviously we are in unusual times. We're in a confirmed recession. We have businesses experiencing operational challenges and constraints like never before, really. It's a challenging time for C-suite execs in particular. Nobody has invented the book quite yet on how we get optimal results for businesses during the COVID maze, really. The good news is that there are some solutions. We had a classic playbook of options before, which would have been put into maybe a nice to have or innovation category before the current situation. But a lot of these have moved forward in strategic plans to continue to operate or be able to operate with less now. So business solutions do remain largely the same. Real innovation is now more common in this environment. We're becoming more creative to fix some of the problems, but we all have this staple set of solutions that we can work from. And there's a real sort of top 5 that people are implementing across the board. So we're going to look at just one of those in particular today. So for me, I'm taking the business angle today. People are absolutely critical in your business. We will always need them, but at this point in time, as it's been shown, they are our biggest weakness. You have critical hires, you have people who might not be available due to illness at the moment, or family constraints, looking after older people or children. Anybody with young children knows the stresses and strains at the moment of trying to continue to be productive as we keep going through all of this. We also have to be aware that our staff could be off for 2 or 3 weeks, or sadly some might not come back. We do have to hope for the best, but also plan for the worst as business leaders. Externally as well, resource constraints apply across the whole supply chain. We have remote working and security issues. We have productivity levels that we have to manage, and we have to still manage that business risk. So I'm just going to take you through a slide. Do the next slide for me, Sam. Okay, so this is where I've taken people through in the last 2 calls that we've done. So I'm just going to flash this up very quickly. So as we've already spoken about it, it's really important that you understand the company's position as it is right now. It can be done by a questionnaire from the execs. The CEO's PA is particularly effective because there's the inherent threat of if you don't fill it in and it's critical, the CEO will get to know about it. And a 30-minute tailored interview, if you can, with some of the senior leaders across the organisation to impact assess, as well as what you can see here, as these key inputs. Everything from your innovation agenda to your strategy to your risk register. A lot of companies will have an immense amount of data that's already done for them. It's pulling all that together very quickly over probably a 5-day time frame, understanding what the current problems are, what the criticality of all of those are, people, resource, technology, customer, and making sure then that you understand what you've got to start to prioritize. Some of these things might already be in your strategy, but they might have been put in for 3 years' time. And you might need to look at bringing them in now because it will improve your resourcing, it will improve your overheads, it will take out some of those bottlenecks where you might have a critical constraint that will hamper your company in continuing to go forward. So all of them are on there. For me, the key one is finance. You know, cash flow is king. If the key people who cannot get your money through the doors aren't there, that's the first thing to look at. But from that, you would produce a spreadsheet, very simple one, with an impact and an assessment and what we need to do about it. So you would plug your technical solution into that, of which we're going to go through RPA, which is the red box right at the top. You know, our next speaker is brilliant at it, and he is going to take you through that data. So for us at the moment, you know, looking at the virus figures, they're still dropping. There is going to be an ongoing impact for quite some time. And forward-thinking organisations should really be looking to remove the repetitive tasks from the general workforce and move forward, releasing us really to do the more important work and to help. It's that flexibility that is now going to get us through, whereas, you know, previously it was less important. Next slide, Sam. Okay, so around the solutions and strategy, once we understand planning and priorities, a key focus is that operational readiness. Previously, you might have done it in a different way. You might have done your change management. You might have got a whole plan of how you embed this in slowly, get people used to it, warm them up to the idea, have that in your benefits case. You know, we've always got the basics such as Lean Six Sigma to standardize processes, and people will have high-level process maps that were done to comply with GDPR as a starting point. And so, you know, the less deviation you have in those processes, the better quality and speed of delivery, including having to correct mistakes. All of that will help your productivity and help you to drive forward. We can still do all of that, but a quick and effective way of taking that to that next level at the moment is the RPA side of it. This should be a staple in any organisation's toolkit. It should be something that we could look to do on a very small basis and then do incrementally as you start to get those quick wins and bring people on. But we don't have the capability to take the standard change management process and the change plan and to take it through in the way that we had before. Everybody understands the imperative. Everybody understands why we've got to do this. It is a unique an opportunity to start to move that forward very, very quickly, to tell people this has to be done in order to keep our business running in the way that it needs to. So it's an absolutely amazing piece of technology. I know some of you already implement it. Some of you will be looking at this actively now. Absolutely. Our next speaker is going to take you through that, because these robots don't need holidays. They'll either work assisted or unassisted. They'll work 365 days a year. And I've had some absolutely amazing results from putting them into big multinationals. So prerequisites, things like process mapping. We have to have that. If you're GDPR compliant, you will have high-level processes. That's a really good starting point to have a look. If not, there are some process tools out there that will do the mapping for you. You will have to buy those as part of either the RPA separately. You also need a really clear change management piece. It might not have been done in the same way as it was done before, but it will allow your workers to free up the mundane and give them that more interesting work. The classic objections revolve usually around fear of job losses, which need to be addressed, and a very clear plan to explain from top to bottom within the organisation, really from director level down, with executive sponsorship throughout the whole life cycle. And that change piece can often be an afterthought, but it shouldn't be. As someone who's been into sort of over 50 of the top FTSE 250 companies over the last 25 years, change management is one of the top 3 areas that's underestimated and not planned appropriately, usually resulting in pushback and user adoption issues for new systems. So it's well worth thinking about. On the flip side, a great business case with appropriate change management budget and time factored into it, which is given the right time and energy within a project plan, and then follow through, can give you a massive positive. And we've seen this recently. We've put technology into new companies that I've been working with, it's taken 3 weeks to go through, and it's been adopted a lot easier than it would have been without the COVID storm we're in. So. Next speaker is going to take us through. Tim is fabulous. He's a brilliant expert at RPA. I'm going to hand back to Sam, and he's going to grab Tim's slides and put those up for you. But any questions, please let me know at the end, and I'll do my best to answer those for you.
Thank you for that, Tracy. That's brilliant. And I think that what was quite pertinent there was the change management piece, getting people on board. I think very, very similar to if you're launching a data science project, getting people within an organization to share information willingly is a big challenge. I think Tim's going to touch on that, but thank you for that, Tracy. That was really interesting and appreciate it. So our next speaker is Tim Olsen. Tim has 20 years experience of delivering process improvement programs. He's worked across telecoms, retail, finance, local and central government. He also established just recently the UK's largest automation centre of excellence and took that to market. We're going to be talking a lot about the Centre of Excellence, or COEs, because I think that's a really important part of taking on an RPA project as a business. So Tim specialises in developing these new automation programs for organisations and growing these COEs and helping those organisations to become self-sustaining and then demonstrate that, full and proper ongoing ROI. So Tim, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'll take you through your slides. Just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Can you see and hear me?
Yeah, we can all see and hear you. Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. I've got face for radio. Okay. Thanks for that, Sam. First of all, welcome to everyone. I'm quite flattered by the number of people who've got attending, and it's great to be working with Sam and Tracy at ERG. So the agenda for today is what is RPA? Why should I automate now of all times? And how do I go about starting my automation journey? Okay, Sam. So I don't know what level of experience we have amongst the audience. So excuse me if you are familiar with this and I teach you to suck eggs for a minute. If you think about Excel and the ability to create a macro on Excel, so you teach Excel, where to move the mouse to, which buttons to press on. You record that as a process, and then it can replay that to carry out those actions for you. At its most simple, that is a form of RPA. But RPA obviously goes much, much further than that and has much greater functionality. But the key thing is that RPA does just, in effect, press keys, it clicks the mouse, it has the ability to open web pages, to use applications, to look up data, make use of it. But it only uses the existing UIs. So it's non-invasive. It doesn't need loads of APIs to work in the back end, and it can overlay existing systems. And that includes perhaps your newer strategic systems, but it also includes your old green screen systems as well that would normally be a nightmare to integrate with. So generally speaking, it's a fairly simple platform, really. And there are primarily two forms of bots. The first of which is an attended bot. And to give you an example, you may have a customer agent in a call center who receives a call from a customer, takes an account number, puts it into a system, and then a bot can then go off in the background to, in parallel to the agent talking to the customer, it can go off to a variety of different systems to pull back relevant information on the customer and present it to the agent. Perhaps then the agent then makes a decision and the bot goes off and does something else, whether it's creating a bill or whatever it may be. So there's human interaction, or what we call human in the loop, in that process. So that's an attended bot. With non-attended bot, an example of this might be that the bot just periodically looks at an email inbox. It waits for an email that comes in that has the title invoice. It then opens the attachments within that email, reads that invoice, it pulls out the key data. Perhaps it then compares that to an Excel sheet, it matches the data, and then according to business logic, it may then process a payment to the supplier. So that is completely zero touch from a human basis, and that's a non-attended bot. And obviously, just like any other computer program, it just follows coded instructions. I would suggest, if your if your processes are well documented enough so that you could take any Joe off the street and get them to follow the process word by word and step by step, then actually RPA should be capable of doing that. And in fact, as we bring other complementary technologies to bear, such as AI, it's possible to train RPA to actually take some intelligent decisions as well. So as the technology advances and it's able to learn more, it can take more and more of those responsibilities into itself. Okay, Sam, next slide. Okay, so what benefits should you expect to see from RPA? The most obvious one is around cost. RPA bots are typically far cheaper to maintain than a human worker. And not only salary-wise, but they don't need desks, they don't need heating. So you would most likely be paying about a third the price of a human employee. But looking at cost alone, and especially FTE, can be problematic, and I'll come back to that in a minute. One of the benefits that we've seen quite recently that has been most prevalent is actually compliance. Obviously, a bot will always follow instructions to the letter, and it will give 100% compliance. And we're seeing that increasingly as being a key factor for RPA, especially in those companies that have quite a lot of regulatory compliance to manage. So, for example, insurance firms, energy firms, etc. And if I give you an example, I know for a fact that one quite large, well, very large insurer, when it gets a GDPR claim that comes in, believe it or not, it actually costs that insurer £250,000 to process that single GDPR claim. So compliance is really quite key. In particular, around the environment that we're currently living in and this crisis, flexibility is key. Bots can very quickly be scaled to deal with peaks in demand. And obviously they work 24/7, 365 days a week. We'll come back to that in a minute. Speed, bots can typically complete activities in a fraction of the time of manual processing. In fact, what I've quite frequently had to do is to deliberately slow down bots artificially so that the back-end systems can keep up with them. So obviously, that is a key advantage. And one that might seem a bit trite is morale. But this is so true. The first bot that I put in, the morning after we deployed it, I called the team, and I was expecting them to be a bit cynical or a bit resistant, and they said, it's been absolutely fantastic. Overnight, the backlog has just disappeared, and we're able to concentrate on much more important things, talking to customers. And the morale in that group and their motivation just increased overnight. It was quite phenomenal. Okay, Sam. Okay, unprecedented. It's a word that we're hearing very frequently now, to the extent that it's something of a cliche. And who would have thought, if you look at these two charts here, who would have thought a couple of months ago that toilet rolls would now be more expensive than a barrel of crude oil? It's phenomenal. The whole foundation of our economy has been turned upside down in a matter of weeks, literally. And it's no surprise that organizations have really struggled to cope with this. And one of the key ways that this has impacted organizations is there's been huge unforeseen variations in demand for their processes. If you look at the DWP, I don't know the exact figure, but they've had, I believe, more than 1 million benefits claims in the first few weeks. Travel companies, they've been having to offer refunds, and obviously healthcare have had huge different forms of peaks in demand. And they've struggled because in most cases they've had to either change their processes dramatically or source significant resource, either additional resource at huge cost or to redeploy resource from elsewhere. And obviously, SLAs have been hit, customer experience has been damaged, and the reputations of these companies have very quickly gone downhill. And that's because the processes that they've been dependent on haven't been flexible to the demand. They've not been automated. They've been highly manual, and they've been dependent on the additional resources in order to carry them out. Okay, Sam. So what we're seeing now, this company HFS does some really good research about emerging technologies. And the chart on the left has been garnered from a survey that was put out in April. And what this shows in summary is that organizations are, on average, 55% of organizations expect to increase their investment in RPA, and that's only surpassed by cybersecurity. So even in these times of crisis and companies cutting back, they are seeing that RPA is key to protecting their revenue streams and giving them the flexibility to perform and compete in the current climate. The chart on the right is showing the longer term trend for RPA, and you can see that there's been phenomenal growth in the past 2 or 3 years, and the expectation is that that growth will continue for the foreseeable future. Okay, Sam? So we know what RPA is, we know why we should be investing in RPA now, but why build an automation CoE? Well, I've worked in a lot of very large organizations, and I've seen examples of automation emerging as small cottage industries in different parts of the organization. And I can tell you that that's just a total recipe for disaster. IT will be resistant to that. There will be no single strategy. Communications will be poor. There won't be any economies of scale. So it's really, really key that you pull all those resources together and build a CoE. It will define and communicate a single organization strategy towards automation. You will be able to ensure high standards. You'll be able to create communities, both within your developers who can learn from mistakes, but also, the wider organizational community to who you can educate and upskill. And similarly, I talked about economies of scale. By selecting the most appropriate tools, building that at scale and expanding on those, you can get the financial economies from that. As I say, you know, learning from mistakes is a key one. Believe me, the first year that you put in RPA and you try to build and scale, you will make a lot of mistakes. We all have, but the important thing is that you learn from those and you don't repeat them. I mentioned cottage industries. You know, the fragmentation and the silos of differing agendas will just kill RPA dead. And apologies, I forgot an item to put on here, but a key part about the ensuring the success of RPA is around service management, being able to support bots once they're built, and having the scale of a CoE and an integrated service management team within that. That is absolutely fundamental to the success of RPA in an organization. Okay, Sam? Okay, so if you're building a CoE, what do you need to consider? And there are three key areas really. There's people, platform, and process, and I'll talk briefly through each of these. If you fail to deliver any one of these areas, the others will fall over like dominoes, okay? And the one area which by far people underinvest in is the people one. So the first item there is strategy. You know, what is your overall strategy for automation? You know, speaking from experience, probably the most common one is cost savings. You know, we will save X number of FTE as a result of doing this, and that's fine. But believe me, you will fail to get buy-in from the teams and employees if you go down that route. And I think there are much broader strategies around the different benefits that you can achieve for RPA, and they will be by far more helpful for you when it comes to rolling it out. It is really helpful if you can get buy-in at the top of your organization, certainly as high up as you possibly can, because once you've got that, it then gives you the mandate to go into any other part of the organization and say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and it's all been approved, and you know, this is how we're going forward. So having someone with the authority to cut through the barriers is absolutely key. So you need to work on getting the buy-in and sponsorship right at the top of the organization. I think communications and engagement is absolutely key. I'll be honest, in my last role, we just didn't foresee how important that was initially. We went from a comms team of 1 to a comms team of 4 in the end, and that was hugely beneficial. You know, we were running webinars, we were doing build a bot days, we were always on the headline for good reasons on the company intranet. So key. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to change the culture of the organization and gain acceptance. And the culture of the organization will change as a result of RPA. Ways of working will change. The future of work will change. And people will be concerned about their roles. And so, you know, education and upskilling the teams is fundamental. People will be working in different ways, and they'll be working with robots, and they need to understand how to do that. And you can democratize RPA and get people really involved in the process. The last thing you should be doing is doing RPA unto others. They need to be brought in and having the opportunity to contribute towards it. You need to think about organization. Now, that is both the organization of your CoE, but also its broader organization. You know, when ways of working change, how will that organization adapt to that? Resourcing models, particularly within the CoE, you know, will you be doing onshore, offshore, nearshore, and how does that affect your delivery methodology? Spoke a bit about the community. You know, it really is about building a community that learns lessons and has education and the opportunity to input. Some of the RPA providers really support that. Sorry, Sam, just go back. Oh, well, That's it. Some of the RPA providers support that quite well. UiPath, for example, has a module that allows you to democratize the finding of opportunities, and people can submit opportunities to you. So that's quite effective. And above all, it's about the avoidance of silos, you know, working at it collectively rather than as individual cottage industries. So the second consideration is around platform. You need to very carefully select your primary software, you know, your RPA software. In the top Gartner quadrant, Magic Quadrant at the moment, you've got Automation Anywhere, who's fairly new to the UK, but huge in the US, very, very keen to get a foothold in the UK. You've got Blue Prism, who are the market leaders in the UK, especially around the large financial institutions. 378 bots in O2, hundreds of bots in Lloyd's. But they've not been investing as much lately in product development. And then you've got UiPath, and UiPath are a really good all-rounder, both back-end, front-end, attended, unattended, and have a good suite of tools. So you need to choose the right one for your business. But it's not just about RPA. Automation is much broader than that, and you may hear the term hyper-automation talked about, and that's where you bring together other complementary tools such as OCR, optical character recognition, you know, the ability to read documents, IVRs, natural language processing, speech to text, and ultimately it's all about getting unstructured data down to structured data that enables you to input that into an automated process. And by also looking at tools such as AI, machine learning, you know, you're able to make quite intelligent decisions amongst the process and actually take out the human much more as a result of adapting to those technologies. So the aim is to really, you know, automate as much of a process end to end as possible, and that's really where you'll get your benefits from. You need to have infrastructure that's very flexible. I talked about peaks of demand. You need to be able to, you know, bring on more bots very quickly. You need to be able to bring new environments online quickly and then close them down again. So the more flexibility you have in the platform, the better. You need to be looking at whether you go cloud or on-premise. My personal experience is that cloud is by far the better solution, and you know, there are solutions out there with Amazon, Azure, and actually UiPath have bought in their own cloud, as have Blue Prism. So there's lots of possibilities there. As I touched on before, if you don't have a strong, really strong service management solution, it will just fall over. You know, bots, contrary to popular belief, they do occasionally go wrong. They do need to be managed just as a workforce. So your digital workforce still needs to be managed. And a properly integrated service management tool will integrate with the RPA system, the platform, and it will give you your exceptions and faults and monitoring and alerting all in one place, and that will make your life so much more easily, so much easier. You will need to build your platform in such a way that it is compliant with your organization's IT standards. So it's really key to involve IT and InfoSec very early in your platform build. Conscious of time, process. So this is how you go about, you know, delivering RPA. Your CoE model is key. There are different models out there. You can look at a federated model. You can look at a hybrid model. My advice would be to always go with a centralized model. So, you know, all your RPA resources are in one place, your standards are in one place. And then if you're implementing in different parts of the business, you know, you do that from a centralized position. Opportunity identification, again, is absolutely key. If you get that wrong, you know, you just won't be able to take RPA forward at all. So the quality of that process is very, very important. And there are different tools on the market now that help you to do that. But it's really about having the skills and the experience to know what's a good opportunity and what isn't. We'll come back to that in a sec. Your delivery methodology is key, whether or not you're going to go agile, whether you're going to use waterfall or a hybrid approach, but having a well-defined methodology that that is at least fairly agile, I think, is key. There are ways in which you can make that process leaner with experience, and I can help you with that moving forward if that helps. Business case, you know, for the opportunities that you find, you need to qualify and validate them, prove that they're commercially viable. So that's key. How you then prioritize those opportunities, and you know which ones to work with and when. And I think one item is that's really key is pre-qualification. And I say that because when I was first building an RPA CoE, we found that we were spending a huge amount of time, you know, getting through the methodology, getting to a point where we're quite close to start and build, and then actually finding showstoppers at that point. And knowing which questions to ask right at the very outset avoids finding those problems much further on when it's extremely costly. So those pre-qualification questions up front are absolutely vital. And that just comes with experience, I think. Control, primarily when I talk about control, I mean governance. You know, by what means is your CoE governed? Who decides what to take forward? How are your processes managed? How is change managed? That's all key. And I think finally, measurement of success. You know, what KPIs do you measure in order to prove whether or not your CoE is being successful? And just before we move on to the next one, depending on what your organization wants RPA for, you may choose, once you've done it internally, to actually try and sell it externally. And in that case, there is another consideration, which I call proposition. And that's around, you know, go-to-market plans and finding your USP and how you go about launching the product. Okay, Sam, last slide. So just briefly, really, you know, this is quite a common journey that organizations go on. You know, you begin by defining your automation strategy, you then move on to pilot, you then move on to small scale automations. And, you know, we will often find that 80% of organizations fail to get past this point. This is where you find a lot of organizations stall. And it is by building a comprehensive CoE and industrializing that automation that you can then move on to the next step. And quite often, you know, the final step, although it doesn't have to be that way, is about bringing on the more advanced technologies such as AI, which gives you really cognitive or intelligent automation. Okay, I hope that's been of use to you. Sam, I think we're going to take some questions now.
Yeah, we are. Tim, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that. And I think the thing that I took out of that the most was, first of all, thank you. That was 22 minutes. You were bang on time there. So thank you for that. There's such a lot to take in. And I think you actually went into so much detail there. Just for the attendees, we are going to give you all the slides for this presentation. There'll also be a link to this video. We're recording it, so you'll be able to watch it back at your leisure. And actually, that last slide that we had before, the final slide, which was quite detailed, I think, Tim, you were saying you could probably spend about a good few hours going through all of those different processes and those different points. we're going to provide the attendees only with some additional information around that Tim's kindly put together for us. So we were really keen with these events so that all of our attendees get something out of this. It's not just about having somebody talk at you for an hour. So we're now going to open up some questions, and I'm going to start. Alpesh Doshi's just given me a question, but Alpesh, just before yourself, if you don't mind, we've got Craig Fanning on the call today. Craig is currently a technical architect in the public sector. Craig, it's up to you whether you want to kind of say who you work for, but you did have a few questions in advance of this call for Tim, and one of them was actually about the public sector versus the private sector. You were really keen to understand what's going on in the private sector and how that's different. Is that fair, Craig? Do you want to unmute yourself and ask that?
Yeah, that is fair. I think when we spoke the other day, Sam, that was exactly what I was looking for, and to see what barriers come up from outside industry that we may not see within government. So I am the technical architect for what we're calling the Intelligent Automation Garage within Department of Work and Pensions. So a lot of this session has resonated of some of the issues, like you said, Tim. Some of our reputation has been damaged because of the pandemic, and as we speak, I know that there are massive recruitment drives to go on to try and catch up with a massive backlog.
Yeah.
So we do already have RPA and DWP, and I think the product one would describe it as a centre of excellence, but after watching your session, I wouldn't. Because we haven't been in that position, and the pandemic proves it. We haven't been in a position. So we've brought in some smaller RPAs to help. Say, best example I've got is the government decided that people should be paying deductions from benefits at this time, should help them as much as possible. That is a huge, there are millions of people who've got deductions from benefits. So we've set up an RPA to first identify those and then take the deductions off. So that's been a good win. But we found we've held back a lot by governance and especially security. So when you're talking about doing end-to-end processes, we have an issue with that because a claim from end-to-end isn't done by one agent, and it's deliberately done that for division of duties. So, try and keep away from internal fraud and that kind of thing. So we're not allowed to do that. And also when you say about more intelligent RPAs making business decisions, again, we're not in a position to do that because, again, the security people and the governance say, you're acting on the Secretary of State's advice, and it's not seen as kosher that a robot is actually making a decision that someone should get a benefit or not. So we seem to be doing some of the things that you've mentioned, but we have different blockers, as in governance is a very much, they do not trust robotics. They seem to think that they can do whatever they want, even though I've described to them that you program them once and you set them off and they will quite happily do that all day long. They seem to think there's some kind of Terminator 2 thing going on in the background. And security is another issue. So our security architecture is very robust, and obviously because we hold a lot of information on every single citizen in Great Britain, they have to keep it that way. So we're sort of doing it with one hand tied behind our backs, really. So it's just interesting to see what the differences was, and how have you got any advice of how we get rid of the blocker of something like a governance that's used to being quite lengthy and time bound, where we want to build quick robots and we want to get them through governance and through security quite quickly. I wonder if you had any advice on that.
My previous role was in Capita, and Capita dealt with everything from building roundabouts to paying GPs pensions to managing large telco call centres to managing housing benefit to absolutely everything, TV licensing, transport for London, you name it. In fact, every one person in the UK came into contact with 60% of it, came into contact each day, 60% chance of using it. So I didn't articulate that very well, but that's how big it was. So my point is, we covered private and public sectors. And I think, in all honesty, I can't really think that there were significant differences between the two. Okay. Security was an ongoing feature right the way through. And I have to admit, to begin with, one of the lessons we learned is we were probably a bit complacent about ISO 27001, thinking that we could go along and it wouldn't be an issue, and we quite quickly learned that it would. So we had to adapt to that. I think probably the biggest difference was that when working in the private sector, we could get things signed off more quickly. Whereas working with, should we say, one of the biggest media companies that's publicly owned in the UK, the time taken to get decisions made and signed off there was really, really painful, because each one would have to go up through 3 or 4 different layers of authorization. And they had very, very stringent requirements. So I'm not sure there's an easy answer, but what I absolutely would say is, especially from the example that you gave, it's really, really key to get the buy-in at the most senior level, and then to educate the whole organization on what RPA is. Because you're absolutely right, they expect Arnold Schwarzenegger to come in and start doing their jobs. And, you know, when I talk about strategy and I talk about why cost savings isn't always the one to go for, people will just assume, oh Christ, you know, I'm going to lose my job for this. I don't want to be involved. I'm not going to help you. I'm going to resist this with everything I can. Whereas actually, if you talk about RPA as augmenting workers' roles and taking away the mundane jobs that they don't want to do and allowing them to focus on value-added activities, more challenging activities, that's how you get people on board. But the other thing is, you know, right from the outset, you need to be involving IT and info security in creating your platform and the methodologies. And with their help and the leadership help, you need to come up with a policy document that says, this is how we go about RPA. These are our security standards. And you can then take that to anyone in the organization that you approach and say, this has been signed off. This is how we're going to go about it. We don't need to have these discussions because we've already got them here. Yeah. And that might help. But you know, I would be lying if I said I could make it all nice and easy for you. It's not that simple, I'm afraid.
Thank you. It's a good answer. That's useful. I'll be working on that when we finish this call.
Thanks for your question, Craig. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Alpesh, I think you had a question for Tim. I'm unmuting you, Alpesh.
Can you do it? Hi, this is Alpesh. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, RPA is just one piece of technology solution that's needed in a company. That I'd be interested to hear from Tim. How does how do you fit RPA into all the other priorities that a company has, and how does it fit into an implementation roadmap? You know, if you've got external package implementations or change transformations, you've got AI data stuff going on. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in most companies, especially reasonably sized large companies. how have you seen RPA perceived across all the landscape of initiatives that companies are doing, and how do they fit that into those initiatives?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think this is one of the reasons I say, you know, don't look upon RPA as a cottage industry. Yeah, if you're trying to start up RPA in one part of the organization, you know, maybe one department or something, you will always gain resistance against that. I think it needs to be a centralized CoE that has a mandate from senior leadership. And what I would suggest is that you have a steerco, okay? And actually on that steerco, you have, for example, someone from IT, as senior as possible, and someone from InfoSec. And then they feel accountable for the delivery of RPA. But also by having the senior level sponsors, they will have input into the portfolios across the organization, and they will be able to champion RPA into those portfolios. And, you know, I did it myself. Actually, perhaps this is a better explanation. What I put into place was I had portfolio managers, and each portfolio manager within RPA faced off to a different division of the business, okay? And they would have a key contact in that business, and they would work together with that contact to find opportunities in that division, and then they would bring it back to RPA, the CoE. We would have our own portfolio analysis and determine which ones gave the best ROI. And then from that, we would decide which ones to take forward. Does that answer your question?
Partially. I think it's that, you know, it's a battle of business priority with different initiatives going on in a particular organization.
Yeah.
You know, you've got finance department, marketing, sales, call center, etc.
Yeah.
The challenge is, well, I'm doing this change in my finance department.
Yeah.
The RPA guys are coming along and saying, well, we can do RPA for you. Well, they're going, well, I'm sorry, I've got this priority here.
Yeah.
How do you battle between?
Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
How do you? The challenge is, how do you fit RPA into all the projects that are all going on? Because people are doing all sorts of other things, and the CoE you may have, you guys are passionate about, you know, in the CoE saying, hey, we're doing RPA, we can solve all your problems. But the reality is you've got a competing priority.
Yeah, no, I get it, absolutely. And, you know, I've managed portfolios myself where we've had different, you know, projects and programs to prioritize. And ultimately, you know, you look at benefits, and you look at timescales, and you look at risk, and you manage the portfolio accordingly. So your role, assuming you're managing the RPA CoE, is to clearly define what the realistic benefits are, how long it will take to deliver them, and then put that forward as an opportunity for the portfolio. And ultimately, somebody somewhere will have to make a decision as to you know, which projects they take forward and which ones don't. But if you have that clearly articulated, and there is faith in what you're saying, and you have a track record of delivering it, then you're much more likely to get that put on the agenda. Okay.
Thank you for that, Alpesh. Question from Nick. Thank you, Nick, for this. I think one for you, Tracy, here. Nick was asking, interested to hear whether we are seeing organisations reach out into their partners to simplify across the supply chain, not just internal stuff. So, Tracy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The good ones are part of that initial assessment that I was talking about earlier, in understanding where you are. And that also leads into the question that we've just gone through. It's making sure that you know what it is, to reset those strategic priorities, to get that absolutely signed off at board level, and then to make those decisions going forward. And one of those might be that you have supply chain constraints. And obviously, there are factors which are within your control and there are factors which are outside of your control. And if you can work with partners, if you've got really good relationships with your suppliers, you may be able to do some backward and forward integration. You may be able to do some other things to try and simplify what might have been a really inefficient process. But now is the time, and you've got the imperative to talk to them, get them around a table virtually, and to say, what can we do to make this better? Are we able to do some Lean Six Sigma on this? Are we able to just look at what we can cut out? And do we have to have all of these steps? An example of this is, for example, signing off contracts. You know, at the moment, we've got blockchain that people have available. Lots of companies hadn't looked at doing that before. All of a sudden, that's perking up people's interest because they can cut out a lot of steps. But in order to do that, you have to work with your partners to use it. So lots of different options. The good companies in real terms are absolutely talking to people both internally and externally to try and get that supply chain as optimized as it can be under the circumstances.
That's great. Thank you, Tracy. Really appreciate that. That's a great answer. Question also from Daniel, Daniel Pass. Daniel asks, well, Daniel, do you want to ask this one?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the example you've given has been based off very large enterprises. There's a significant amount of small to medium-sized enterprises that have got circa just under 1,000 employees, multiple sites, lots of complex systems in environments such as financial services, which is the space I'm working in. A lot of your examples kind of talk about much larger orientation. So for me, when I'm looking at systems now, I need to go to board with, I can acquire it as a utility or as a commodity. There's a very low onboarding capability. It's very simple in which for us to get started, we can deliver immediate value very quickly. And then as we grow and mature with it, that solution can go in equal measure. So I think my question really is there anything out there that exists that's almost a little bit of semi-self-service that can avoid the heavy-duty consultants and pro-serve, significant upfront licensing and capex that are usually associated with these kind of endeavors? Because what's the entry point for a smaller entity with a limited budget?
That's a good question. I think what I would say is, you know, go for a flexible solution that can grow with you. You know, something like UiPath has a very good suite of tools that manages the entire life cycle, and I think a lot of it actually comes free with the main license. So, you know, I'd have to look at costs, but I think go for something that's quite flexible that yeah, can grow with the organization. But I think, you know, it's not so much about the cost of tools, it's about the cost of the resources and the COE. And I think you can start small.
So I get that. So
yeah.
I'm going to challenge that though. If an organization has got 180 people in it, you've got to scale down and still sell the COE virtual to a potentially a relatively a board that does not have exposure to it. You use a phrase like center of excellence around a subject like RPA. You've got far too many acronyms for a small group, and potentially they have small business owners who have now grown to a small to medium-sized enterprise and who have only got one or two people, such as myself, who actually have come from enterprise backgrounds. There's got to be a way in which to slightly smooth and make that a smaller and simpler to understand offering while still leveraging that value. And that would be my challenge back, because otherwise you're going to basically say anybody who hasn't got multi-million pounds worth of budgets every year and doesn't have a minimum number of 500 people and is going to automate a dozen processes that as you said, can save £1 million a month. You're almost saying it's a waste of energy. And I don't think that's the case. I think RPA is adaptable for a 10-man entity organization as much as it is for an enterprise. My question is anybody actually realistically, in your current experience, looking at that in any detail, or are they just saying SMEs, not really our thing yet, too much complexity, or not enough repeatable use cases, etc.? It's important because people like me are leveraging RPA internally, but we've done it through an element of self-build because, as you say, no one's really got anything that we could see that's sitting in the space unless I'm missing something.
You know, from technology-wise, I'm not sure I can answer that other than, you know, as I say, go for something that's flexible and scalable. But I think, you know, talking about the CoE, you know, I've previously worked with squads of eight people in a squad plus you know, shared accountabilities for example, architecture and service management and so on. I think the important thing is that not every role will have an individual, a dedicated individual, but you may have in your teams, you may have somebody who is covering two of those roles. You know, you may have someone who covers the role of a BA and a developer, for example, or a developer and a CSM. But I think the important thing is to ensure that you know, of the considerations that I spoke about, each of those is covered off in some way, because you're still going to have to communicate, you're still going to have to educate. It's just you may not have you know, a comms person to do that. It might be whoever's leading your CoE or whatever. Those activities still need to be done.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for that, Daniel.
Okay.
Question from Isaac. Isaac, are you still on the call? I'm just going to ask this question on behalf of Isaac. So Isaac asks, usually the leadership questions on the ROI on the RPA investments, which mostly cannot be defined or quantified in terms of value. How do we respond to this? For example, RPA platform license and bot charge plus team involved with salary. So I guess this is an ROI question really, Tim. But maybe going back to the considerations that you would, why implement RPA?
So the first thing is, well, the first thing is to have a good, clear business case template. Okay. Once you've got that, you can plug anything into it and it will give you a clear ROI. I think the next point is to attempt to make the benefits tangible. So if it is a case that you know, you're saving somebody 25% of their time, then, you know, are you able to say, well, okay, that is a clear FTE saving of X amount. If it's a case that you're putting in something that avoids a regulatory fine, you know, what is the level of that fine? If you're going to be fined £3 million for getting that wrong, you know, maybe you can say, what is the chance of us getting that wrong over X period, and make a judgment about what level of investment would pay back. Yeah. It's about trying to make the benefits as tangible as you can and then applying them against the business case. But in some circumstances, you know, like morale, okay, you might be able to make that tangible by saying, okay, well, if you reduce the rate of attrition by 20%, you know, and you are having to stick your finger in the air here, but if you reduce the rate of attrition by 20% and it costs us X amount to recruit people, you know, then what are the savings that are attributed to that? But there may be some things, you know, pure like morale, which you can't measure, and you will have to put those forward as an intangible benefit and saying, well, look, well, this is going to cost us whatever it is, you know, £50,000 in a year, but people's morale will increase as a result of it. You know, do you want to go with that? But very often you will find, you know, there are employee satisfaction indicators, for example. So there will be KPIs for most things that you can measure in one way or another and say, well, this is a cost versus the expected outcome. And I think that's the only way you can do it, really.
Thanks for that, Tim. Paul, I think you've got a question for Tracy or Tim.
I was just really going to build on Tim's point there, really. I've worked in RPA for a number of years now, and most of the business cases seem to initially focus on FTE savings and perception that you can drive out 25% of the costs. And And very rarely do I ever see 25% of the people ever disappear. In fact, very rarely do I see anybody disappear from any organisation. And there's two reasons for that. One, you need to have done quite a piece of work beforehand on your processes to understand where you're spending your time in any of those processes currently. So you do actually already need to fit RPA within a framework of productivity improvement anyway. And then once you've made those changes, it's more about creating capacity than it is about removing people. Most of the people I've done RPA pieces of work for have been under enormous constraint, and nobody can quite get through all of their workload in the day. And the RPA piece is about removing those things and creating capacity to do the things that never quite get to the top of the to-do list. And what that allows you to do is to focus more on some of those customer service things in delighting your customers with what they do. So I think that, don't be fixated on an ROI based on FTE savings, because I've never seen people walk out the door as a result of an RPA project. And to take Daniel's point, Daniel Pass's point, I absolutely agree. I think there is room in the market for a multi-tenanted RPA solution. I know in the past we've seen some that help orchestrate your robots, because some of them sell an orchestrator tool and it's quite expensive, but you could do a multi-tenanted version of that quite easily. But actually to have a multi-tenanted robot where you can throw work at it, I've not seen that yet. There are a couple of people talking about it, but I think most of the tool providers are focused on license revenue, not on professional services revenue, and so they're not really that interested in selling it as something that they manage in the sense that they get extremely involved with. They want to sell you the license and let you get involved with running it, and let all the professional services people buzz around and sell you their services to help you do that. So I do think you're right. For the SMEs, there's a space for that kind of multi-tenanted solution.
That's great. Thank you for that input, Paul. Tracy, is there anything that you want to add into the discussion there? Because I think we've covered quite a few points.
No, I think, we've had a really good session on this. I think the biggest thing for me is always making sure that you get the right people involved up front, you tell them the right things, you bed them in gently, you make sure that they're prepared, that policies are in place, that everything is in the right line up for them to then have those business cases and have that put in front of them, and for them to be positive about it. Because for some people it is a really big leap of faith from the Terminator style approach into what RPA actually is. I did it with the council. It was quite spectacular when I gave them a couple of 3-minute videos to click through whilst we were finishing the end of a meeting, and I bedded them in very gradually to get them over that initial hurdle. So lots of ways you can do it. You just have to understand your audience and what it is that that they're going to object to, and plan that in up front so that you've addressed them before they become the objections.
Thank you, Tracy. Tracy, at the moment we can see more of your picture, your beautiful picture behind you, than your face. Thank you. There we go. That's lovely. Right, we've got another question from Craig, and it was just a second point around FTE savings. Although we have made significant savings in less recruitment. Craig, do you want to expand on that question?
Yes, we've had a couple of short-lived RPAs, especially when, say, for instance, Universal Credit moved from one platform to another. There would have been, I think they were looking at recruiting 35,000 extra staff, temporary staff, just to clear this backlog. And we did it in a couple of months. And I think it cost less than $2,500 or something like that. It was very minimal cost. And obviously, you've got to recruit. The other aspect how I went with the business case was not only do you have to recruit these people, but you also have to train them up as well. So even if you get, if it takes 13 weeks to get the workforce in, you then got another 5 or 6 weeks on top of that to train them up fully. When a robot, we had it, we liaised with the business, got business analysts out there, looked at the process in depth, got robots set up, and we just absolutely blitzed a massive backlog that would have taken a huge recruitment. And we've done that on a couple of occasions. So I found when I put in my business case that instead of going for the FTE, because like Paul says, sometimes we have started to get that we don't lose staff. People are afraid they're going to lose staff, but we've not lost any staff due to putting RPA in. So I sell the fact that we may not have got rid of existing staff, but we've certainly not brought any future staff in. And that goes well. And another point I wanted to make, which is good, what I'm picking up as well is language. So when I go to our governance boards and the chief architect is sat there, he will describe RPA as ghost computing, which has a negative connotation to it, but I'm quite liking Tim's language of non-invasive. So that I'm going to use that from now on, unless you've copyrighted it, of course.
No.
Well, there you go, Craig. You've got something useful out of today, then, haven't you?
Definitely.
That's fantastic. Have we got any last questions before we wrap up? I think we've gone over our time, but I think it's actually been really, really useful. So I really appreciate all of the questions and the answers. It's been really interactive today. But we're going to just take one last question from the floor. So fingers on the buttons, whoever wants to unmute themselves and ask a final question. No? Okay, all right. There was one question that Daniel shot off before. He was talking about commoditized on-demand RPA platforms. I think we sort of maybe touched on that, but from the RPA suppliers out there, Tim, who's really kind of doing some innovative stuff right now?
Generally speaking, I would suggest that Blue Prism are going backwards, if anything. Automation Anywhere and UiPath are coming on leaps and bounds. They've had a massive amount of investment. UiPath in particular are doing a really good suite of tools around process mapping and the life cycle of RPA. Whereas Automation Anywhere, they've just basically made all their proposition low code and web based. They've got some very good OCR and AI capabilities. So it's very much horses for courses, but there's a huge amount of investment in the market at the moment.
Thanks for that, Tim. Paul also mentions Kofax.
Yeah.
Paul, do you want to expand on Kofax, what they do? Do you know what I'd like to do is, if you were to compare RPA suppliers and try to actually say, well, which one's more like Microsoft, which one's more like Google, which one's more like Amazon, just to give us a little bit more context, where would you place them?
Well, I don't know whether I could give you that. Kofax is one that I'm working on a couple of projects at the moment, and Kofax have been better to deal with than I'd expected. I'd come across them in some research on them a couple of years ago, and they were sort of they seem to have got a more rounded solution now. Some of the guys that we've had looking at it have been impressed with them, and they engage well commercially as well. So you can become a partner of theirs with a small number of people. I think it's about $1,400 or something like that, and that includes the cost of training. But their cost of training is actually, if you're not, apart from that initial offer when you're a partner, is about $4,000 per person, which is up there with Blue Prism. I absolutely agree with Tim. Blue Prism slipping back. They spent a lot of money on marketing and then haven't really followed through. UiPath have got a huge investment and are, I think they expanded rather rapidly. They've contracted a little and they've focused in on what they're doing, and they're a lot better now. Automation Anywhere, they've always been large in the States, less so over here. They continue to do well. There's a few other little fringe players as well, like Another Monday is another one that I've come across recently, and a few of those other small ones. But it's not just the tools. So most of the stuff I'm trying to do is trying to get people to be tool agnostic in many ways. There's lots of other things you need to think about in your RPA ecosystem. You've got to think about how do you get things digitized in the first place? You've got to think about the OCR end of stuff, getting things in, and then you've got to think about stuff at the other end. You know, RPA is great at doing things in a very systematic way and storing consistent data. So you've got great analytics. So a good analytics engine, some good dashboarding on the other end of it can really help you as well. So building an ecosystem of tools, not just thinking about the tool in the middle, is important. And I'm sorry, I had to dip out for half an hour of your presentation, so you may well have covered some of these bits, Tim. So apologies if I've gone over old ground.
No, Paul, I completely agree with you. And one of the analogies that I often use is you'll find RPA business analysts going into an organization, as I put it, with a hammer looking for a nail. Yeah. And if they don't find a nail, they walk away. But you're absolutely right. You know, the idea is to go in with a full set of tools and look to see how you can, you know, automate an end-to-end process by bringing all those tools into play. And that is really how you scale and get your benefits from not just RPA, but automation. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. I really appreciate that, Paul. And Tim, thank you for today. Tracy, thank you for today. I think it's been a really, really good session, this one. I think one of our best, I must say. We're going to provide you with loads of information after this now. So there's the slides from today. There's access to the video recording of today. Tim's also kindly, as I said earlier, going to provide us with a bit more information which expanded on his second to last slide. So we're going to send that out to all the attendees. So thank you all for joining. I'll just finish by saying, you know, ERG, we're a tech recruitment business. We've been around for 16 years, very, very strong in the public sector. Part of my role is to grow our private sector name and to build more relationships. And this is just one of the ways in which we're trying to engage differently with the market, whether it be from a candidate or a client perspective. We view everyone as people. So I really thank everybody that joined on the call today. It was brilliant for me. I've learned an awful lot. And thank you for everyone that's asked the questions. It was really, really useful. If anybody would like to engage with Tracy or Tim in any other detail, please get in touch. Tracy and Tim are both available right now for interim contract opportunities, and be happy to have a chat with you offline about that. But thank you again. Tracy, Tim, thank you once more. And yeah, we'll hopefully see you on the next call next week. And then we're going to be hearing some feedback from our attendees over the last few weeks on what people want to hear next. Things like cloud, data, and maybe even 5G and AI, and even one dedicated purely around RPA in more detail. So thanks everyone for joining the call, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks, Sam.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.